that time, and the Ayatollah today is a Shia or Shiite Muslim. And the Ayatollah was very critical of the Shah of Iran for his basically alliance with, affinity for the West, I'm sure in his mind, the evil West, or the great Satan West and great Satan United States. And again, he was very critical. The country was not receptive to him at that particular time. So he made his way over to Iraq, where he continued to be rather critical of the Shah of Iran. The people of Iraq did not really appreciate that either, or the Iraqi government did not. There were some people who were sympathetic to the Ayatollah in southern Iraq who were Shiite Muslims, but the Iraqi government was concerned that the Ayatollah would stir up a conflict between Iran and Iraq, which of course, as it turns out, did happen regardless, and that he also would stir up those Shiite Muslims in the southern part of their nation, even against them. So he was basically booted out or encouraged to leave Iraq. He made his way over to France, where he gained a little bit more exposure, a little bit more notoriety, was still very critical of the Shah of Iran. And while in France, he was able to build up more strength, more support, and ultimately he made his way back into Iran. And through the movement that he led, they were in fact able to depose, to boot out, to overthrow the Shah of Iran. And so, and again, if we break it down here, a branch of her roots, the her we're talking about is a religion, I believe Islam, and we're talking about the Shiite branch of Islam that came into Iran, to that kingdom of the north, and wound up prevailing against the king at the time, which was the Iranian Shah. Verse 8, and shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Almost said king of the south. But when the Shah of Iran lost that conflict and was basically no more ruler over Iran, as mentioned, he had a good relationship with Anwar Sadat. Sadat welcomed him in to Egypt as basically a refugee, if you will. And the Shah did take much of the wealth, even having been defeated. He still nevertheless did take much of the wealth of Iran into Egypt with him. And even the Shah of Iran's son carried some of that wealth from the Iranian treasury even to our country, to the United States. And then the king of the south, again that being Sadat, did continue more years than the king of the north for a couple of reasons. Number one, this particular king of the north, the Iranian Shah, was no more in power, and number two, he did pass away before Anwar Sadat did. Verse 9, so the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. And so there Sadat would continue. And again, Sadat was actually the first Arab leader to recognize Israel. He wanted to establish peace with Israel and within the region of the Middle East. He actually worked with our president at the time, Jimmy Carter. They worked on the Camp David Peace Accord in an attempt to bring peace, to establish peace in that region and to establish peace with Israel. And for his efforts, actually, Anwar Sadat would win the Nobel Peace Prize along about 1979, 1980, somewhere in there. Verse 10, but we're going to find out that having said that, there would be some people who would not want peace. Verse 10, but his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. A strong army, a large army here. And one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. Now, the word sons here, the sons shall be stirred up, is very interesting as it would turn out, because Anwar Sadat was very respectful of, had great admiration for his military, for his troops, as any commander-in-chief, if you will, should. And not going to get too political here, but there were a lot of people who felt like, including myself, that our last president did not have a great deal of respect for the military. The previous president, whether he was perfect or not, certainly George W. Bush did seem to have that respect for the military. But regardless, Anwar Sadat admired and respected his fighting troops, his fighting forces a great deal, and referred to them actually literally as his sons. But in 1981, they were having a great assembly of the armed forces of the Egyptian army that were passing before him in a parade. And during that parade, certain members of the Egyptian army, again, whom Anwar Sadat referred to as his sons, actually rose up and assassinated him. There, basically in broad daylight, in the public view, in the public eye, he was assassinated by members of his own military. And he knew that there was trouble coming, or he sensed it, because before that he had even went so far as to declare Sharia law. He knew that that there were parts of Egypt that were becoming more radicalized in the Islamic faith, and he would even go so far as to declare Sharia law to be the Sharia law to be the law of the land. But none of that really mattered, or none of that really helped him, because they wound up assassinating him anyway. Verse 11, and the king of the south, now this would be the next king after Anwar Sadat, who's a name that you may be familiar with, who was still king until not all that long ago, about 2011, or when it was, when we had the Muslim Brotherhood that deposed him. But Mubarak took over for Anwar Sadat, and the king of the south shall be moved with color, again with wrath, with anger, with indignation, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, a large army, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And this would take place, I believe, during the Iraq and Iranian war. That if you want to call it a holy war in their perspective, or that border war, that religious war that lasted from 1980 to about 1988, and Egypt under Mubarak would side with Iraq against Iran, and Egypt would contribute quite a number of troops, hundreds of thousands of their own troops, I believe, to that effort. Verse 12, and when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. This was a war in which there was really no winner when it came down to it. Again, it lasted from 1980 to 1988. 1 million people would lose their lives during that war. About 600,000 Iranian troops would wind up losing their life over that 8-year period. About 400,000 Iraqi troops, or a combination of Iraqi and Egyptian troops, would lose their lives. And yet, there would really, again, be no clear winner. There would be no new territory won. It was kind of a stalemate, with just a million lives lost almost for nothing. Verse 13, for the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. Now, we can look at this as Iran. I think we can also look at this as Iraq in later years as well, because, like I said, this basically refers to Iran, but the king of the north, the kingdom of the north, in relation to Judah, Jerusalem, would have been kind of that old Babylonian Iraq/Iran area. And you would have Saddam Hussein, of course, after this war, not too long after this war had ended, that would make his move into Kuwait, and that he would seek to enrich and enlarge himself and increase his power and influence in that region. Verse 14. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. And this becomes rather interesting too. Who are the robbers of thy people? Well, and if you have I don't know necessarily if you have any version of the Bible that it's this in all ways, but it's thy people, capital P on people, but we're talking about Daniel's people. So basically we would be talking about people of Israel, or really more along the lines of the house or the tribe of Judah. But the robbers of those people would be those people who would try to blend in, mix in with the tribe of Judah, would refer to themselves as Jews, would take over the scribe duties, as it says in 1 Chronicles, the second chapter, along about verse 55, I believe. And they would also wind up taking over much of the priesthood in returning from the Babylonian captivity that Daniel was, of course, a part of, when Ezra noted after coming across the river, or making a count by the river, that there were no Levitical priests, that when he did a count, a census of the priesthood, there was none of the sons of Levi, but you did have these Nethinims, these strangers given to service, who were originally basically just hired to chop wood and carry wood for the temple, but they wound up actually becoming the priest within that temple, and they became the scribes and the Pharisees that ultimately, of course, led the way in crucifying Christ. They are the ones that are referred to in Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 3, those of the synagogue of Satan who claim to be Jews but do lie. And quite frankly, they are the robbers of just about all people. They are, in fact, the globalists, if you will. They are, in fact, the ones who want to bring in, who want to establish the New World Order. And it is interesting to note that shortly thereafter, this Iran-Iraq war had come to its conclusion, and even after we had gone into Iraq for the first time, that you had, rather infamously, President George H.W. Bush talking about a new world order being created. And they tried to create that new world order, or they thought they could create that new world order back during that time. As it turns out, they failed to do that back then. And we're going to find out, I believe, even next couple of verses here, why they failed to do so. Verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. In other words, the king of the north winds up being rather successful with his conquest and with his mission here. Verse 16, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land which by his hand shall be consumed. 17, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter